Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I'm sorry, I'm still trying to catch my breath. This has been on the run all morning. It is truly an honor for me to be here with you at your gathering this year. And I don't know how many of you were at the service earlier, but I started off talking about the danger of a small amount of knowledge. And I know that from personal experience. And in the sermon I talked about my introduction to Amos, but I knew that from when we lived in England. I took French for 2 years in high school, and then we went on a trip to France with the school, and I was speaking fluently French to the people on the train, and I knew that I was having a really in-depth conversation, and my French was amazing. And then fast forward 10 years ahead, and I am in France now as an exchange student who has been majoring in French, and get there and realize how bad my French is. And thinking back to that young child who was so sure that she was conversing in the language very fluently was actually really frightening to me, to imagine what were people thinking who were in conversation with me. And I thought about that when I think about how very often our foreign policy in this country seems to be run. That there seems to be an idea we latch on to one issue and move with that issue without any kind of research into the culture, the people, the area, the history. And I like to use as an example that I speak to young people, and I say, I remember when the US first started arming insurgents in Afghanistan, when they were fighting the Soviet Union. Is anybody else that old? And that that at that point the only thing we were interested in was the fact that they were fighting the Soviet Union. And what the history, what their concerns were in that conflict didn't appear in our minds at all. And so then when we have the Taliban and Al-Qaeda, it seems that they came out of nowhere. And yet, if we looked at our own history in the region, we would have seen our place in the founding of those movements. And so for me, I think that if we say we are those who are about peace and justice, one of the first things that we have to be about is respect for the people and the places that we want to be involved in, that we allow people their own voice in determining the path of their own country. And I spoke about in terms of foreign policy, but I say this as somebody who was in this country during the anti-apartheid movement, and was amazed at how often I would go to solidarity meetings with the people of South Africa and would have US activists saying, the African Nationalist Congress is the sole representative of the South African people. And I'd say, well, no, the African National Congress is probably the most popular, but I have relatives who are Pan-Africanist Congress, who are Azanian people's organizations, and it is not for you as the solidarity to tell us who our representatives are. What it is for you is to be paying attention to what is happening in your country and to be giving us the opportunity to meet with your leaders and to be for you to listen to the voices of South Africans, because the only people who are going to be able to determine South Africa's future are going to be South Africans. And what we need from those who struggle for justice is to at least recognize that responsibility and capability within us as South Africans to make those determinations about our future. So as we are today and looking around the world at the many, many areas that we are concerned about, and I missed about 2 weeks of class a couple of weeks ago, and I had very good reasons for missing class. Don't worry, I wasn't just taking naps instead of being in class. That happens sometimes, but that wasn't what was happening at that point. And came back into one of our classes, and the only conversation going on was about ISIS, right? And I'm sure that it's like, oh my gosh, did you see they beheaded 2 people on film, and this is awful, this is evil, this is, and I said, okay, so I'm willing to go with you to this is evil, but we haven't had this discussion about drone attacks on people in that region. We haven't had this discussion about what is going on in Gaza in this discussion, in this class. But ISIS all of a sudden is calling us into something where we have been willing to ignore the death and suffering that is endemic in that region until we see 2 people beheaded. And what does that say to the people of the region about what we term human rights? Who is human and whose rights are we concerned about? So if we are those who say we are struggling for justice and peace, we cannot be those who pick and choose which human being's suffering is important to us. We cannot be those who pick and choose which violence is actually violence. We cannot be those who pick and choose with whom we mourn, with whom we weep, with whom we struggle. We have to be those who say what Irene said, one of my mottos, if you like, who say in everything that we do that we are guided by Ubuntu, by the idea, by the belief that every single human being is a person of infinite worth and value, and that every single human being has the right to peace and justice, and that we have to always stand with those whose voices are not heard, and make sure that we insist that if no one else will hear their voices, that we will listen to their concerns, that we will listen to their dreams for their country, for their region, that we will listen to their fears of their safety and the lives of their children, that we will listen to the dreams that they have for a peaceful country, a peaceful community, a peaceful town, and that we will then take what we hear and make that what guides our actions in our activism. So I thank you all for taking time out of your Sunday to be here, and I know that you are going to hear some truly awesome speakers, and I was just like the appetizer, so thank you.
Very appetizing appetizer. Is there any hope that the ANC will have a leader to replace Jacob Zuma, who will stop the corruption at the top of the ANC and improve the lives of the millions living in abject poverty in the townships, such as Khayelitsha and Langa?
And the short answer is yes. I mean, I think that we all, as I said earlier in my sermon, that we live in hope and we work for that South Africa for which we struggled. And as I said, that the disappointments of what we have seen with corruption, with the vast wealth disparity in the new South Africa is definitely not what we had hoped for. And I think that, you know, to expand that question even more, I think that it is possible that a leader will come not necessarily out of the ANC, that there is much movement going on. I mean, people have said that there is no way that the ANC is going to be displaced from government, but we see a movement in a growth of third parties in South Africa, some of them problematic, but, you know, at least they're a different voice. And so there is very much even the possibility of not necessarily an ANC leader in South Africa's future.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Naomi.
Go to the mic and read it to me.
All right, you can't hear me otherwise? Okay. Oh, you want me to go down here?
No, go to that mic. That's the TV mic. Go to the pulpit mic. Where was the yes sir?
Yeah. Sir.
Yeah, now you go.
Naomi, could you comment on the relationship of ANC and Desmond Tutu with Israel as to bomb and war and Palestine? A small question. You don't have to answer.
Okay, yeah. And I'm not completely sure what the question. So it seems like there were three different questions. So the question about my father's relationship with the ANC, and you know, if you're paying attention to what's going on in South Africa, it's a very tense relationship. But and again, I think that one of the things that my father has always said is that when the church is too comfortable with the government, then there's a problem. Mm-hmm. That the church's role is always to be critical of the government, no matter who the government is. And that definitely would not make for a popular church person, obviously. So it's a good place. It's a tense place, but it's a good place. It's where the church is meant to be.
I heard your glorious sermon this morning and got re-inspired with hopes of change, but only briefly. Sorry about that. Your message was particularly articulate, but it's a message 2,000 years old. So the challenge is, how will we change the world against the overwhelming power that dictates the nature of our world? But please continue your ministry. Salim Lone Kenyan met with your dad when he came to help Kenya.
Thank you. Response, right? I'm not sure. And I completely understand the sense of, we've been saying this, we've been doing this, we've been struggling with this for generations. But I think that is part of what we are called to be in the world, right? And it is not to give up the belief that a kingdom, a time of justice and peace is indeed a possibility. If you didn't believe that, you wouldn't be here, right? Or maybe you would, I don't know. But I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe that, in fact, what we are struggling for is a possibility. And the fact that we haven't achieved it yet, to me, just says the struggle continues. Right?
Many likened the Gaza and Palestinian situation to the apartheid situation. What do you think can be done to galvanize the world to rally support for the Palestinians?
And I think that the first thing that we need to do is to listen to Palestinian voices, which are so missing in any discussion on the Middle East. That we have allowed ourselves to be told who the Palestinian people are. Mm-hmm. And we have been told that they are terrorists. We have been told that they don't want peace. We have been told all manner of things, apart from their history and their story and their struggle. And that until and unless people around the world, and particularly in the United States, listen to the voices of Palestinian people and hear the pain, the suffering that this people has gone through, and pay attention to the role that the world community has played in continuing their suffering, and in fact in aiding their suffering to be continued and increased, that there will be no peace in the Middle East. And until and unless we are willing to see Palestinians as fully human and fully worthy of human rights, which I think that we have stepped away from, that fully deserving human rights in the land of their ancestors, then we will continue to be part of their suffering and oppression.
How do you see the leadership of the United Nations affecting the promotion of peace and disarmament?
That's an easy one.
Yes, seriously.
Well, you're not up here for easy.
And again, I mean, honestly, the United Nations, it only is as powerful as the nations that are members of the UN allow it to be. And as long as we say we give lip service to the idea of the UN and don't give political and financial support to the structure of the United Nations, then there is very little that we can expect the United Nations to achieve. So again, it goes back to what are we doing where we are in terms of our political leaders and their perspective and responsibility to the United Nations in order to enable the United Nations to play the role in the world that it was imagined to be about playing, as keeping of peace and helping with the implementation of human rights and justice around the world, and particularly in places of conflict.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you. Thank you.